Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and good evening to our dear friends coming to us from Africa. My name is John Allen. I'm the president of the Brookings Institution, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all to this important and timely discussion following, as it does, International Women's Day. At the beginning of each year, the Brookings Africa Growth Initiative publishes its flagship report, Foresight Africa, which provides insights and policy proposals to decision makers on key topics that are likely to impact growth and development in Africa in the year ahead. Foresight Africa seeks to draw a global focus towards critical African issues through research and analysis, as well as the engagement of high-level participants to highlight the priorities on the continent in the coming year. While gender has been highlighted as an important issue in past editions, this year the Africa Growth Initiative has dedicated an entire chapter specifically focused on the challenges and the opportunities facing women and girls on the African continent. And it's appropriate that we should reflect on these themes in our distinguished Foresight authors as they explore this week and as we celebrate International Women's Day. Notably, women's leadership in Africa is not a new phenomenon. Over the past few decades, African women and girls have demonstrated their capacities to be leaders on the local, national, and global stages. The Africa Growth Initiative's own distinguished fellow, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, now serves as the Director General of the World Trade Organization. Another of the initiative's distinguished fellows, Vera Songwe, is the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And it's worth noting that many African countries have had female heads of state, and we're hoping for many more in the future. Africa's young girls continue to pave the way for the rest of the world too, fighting for social justice, campaigning against climate change, and leading protests for equality and peace. Indeed, the framing essay on gender in the Foresight report this year was written by Madame Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the former president of Liberia, who's a good friend of Brookings. Other notable women leaders who contributed to this year's edition include the Honorable Winnie Kiza, former opposition leader in the parliament in Uganda, who joins us today on the panel, and Madam Janine Mabunda Lioko, who's the member of parliament and former president of the National Assembly of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Mrs. Yvonne Aki Sawyer, who is the mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone. She also contributed viewpoints on this year on climate change. So I am really delighted that Foresight Africa and the report continues to attract voices of Africa's youth, including Doctors Rebecca Afua and Klege and Adafunka Ekine, who are participants in the 2013 Echidna Scholars program at the Center for Universal Education here at Brookings. So Brookings is proud to have the opportunity to feature these impressive women, both the Foresight authors and our panelists today, and to showcase their leadership, especially because, unfortunately, recent events, including the COVID-19 pandemic, have led to reversals in the gains on women's and girls' education and health and livelihood. Equality between the genders in Africa and around the world has yet to be truly achieved. So at the same time, anecdotes of how Africa's women and girls have played vital roles in driving the region's economic recovery, serving as caretakers and doctors and nurses and sewing masks and managing to support their families in times of lockdowns, among other achievements, abound. And they deserve our attention, and we should be spotlighting and highlighting these. So I hope today's events and the important conversation it provokes elevates and hopefully accelerates progress for girls and women in Africa. And I'll turn the floor over to the Africa Growth Initiative Director, Aloysius Ordu, and the non-resident senior fellow, Jenny Klugman, to lead this important conversation amongst our eminent panelists. So again, congratulations on the report, congratulations on the great work of the Africa Growth Initiative, and we couldn't do it without the partnership of the women and the girls of Africa who are participating today. So with that, again, it's a pleasure to be with you. Aloysius, over to you.
Thank you very much, John, for making the time to be with us this morning. We gratefully appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you very much. As John mentioned, my partner for today's moderating of this event will be Jenny Klugman, who's a non-resident senior fellow with us at the Africa Growth Initiative. I'm particularly delighted to welcome her to this. Viewers who are interested in submitting questions to us, to our panel today, welcome to email us at events@brookings.edu or via Twitter at Brookings Global. Let's now get started with our distinguished panel. I am particularly delighted that Jamie Cooper, chairman of Big Win Philanthropy, is here with us today. Honorable Winnie, former opposition leader of the Republic of Uganda, is also with us. Fiona Tregana, professor of economics, University of Johannesburg, is with us. And Michelle Williams, dean of the faculty and professor, Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Harvard Kennedy School, is also with us. Distinguished panelists, I bid you all a warm welcome. Okay, so let's get started. What we'll do right away is each of our panelists to share with us 2 actions they have seen basically pay off in practice to accelerate gender equity on the African continent. Starting with you first, Honorable Winnie Kiza.
I would like to thank you, moderator, and all the other panelists, and Brookings in general. Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development is hinged on a central transformative promise of leaving no one behind. And with this, for us, if I may take the experience of Uganda, the aspect has been on ensuring that we domesticate the international legislations, the international declarations, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against women, and of course, the Maputo Declaration. And with this being domesticated in our constitution, many of the women have found avenues of giving each other a shoulder to lean on. A lot of mentorship, cross-intergenerational mentorship, is one thing that I've seen paying off in the emancipation of women. And I know that those who are great today have been held on the shoulders of those who are greater than they were. And therefore, the cross-intergenerational mentorship is one aspect. But also a team of women that have dedicated themselves to ensuring that they create awareness amongst the men and women of this country, amongst the young and old of this country, to ensure that they espouse the values and aspects of empowering women and in terms of leadership, and therefore accelerating the emancipation and the gender equity in the country. As we speak right now, there are a lot of legislations that have followed to accept and give women a fair hearing, fair representation, and this is what gives us the 35% representation in parliament because of the quota system and affirmative action that was given through the Constitution under Article 33, Section 5 of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. So these are some of the aspects that have seen women participate in nurturing young girls, in espousing the aspects of true leadership of women, and increasing on the representative of women. They are issues that I've personally benefited from as a member of parliament, because I was in parliament for 15 years under a quota system. And this quota system was provided for in the constitution, unlike many of the other African countries where my sisters cannot participate in leadership because of the cultural norms and stereotypes. Our constitution equally provided for a section in the constitution that talked about redressing the cultural imbalances and historical injustices that were meted against women, to ensure that women are accorded equal dignity of men in the Constitution. And this has given us a leverage in seeing men and women taking up leadership positions, even at party level and at national level. And I think this is a practice that I would encourage other African countries to really benchmark and ensure that they put in practice for the growth of our economies and for the development of our nations.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Winnie. Thank you. Jamie, over to you. 2 minutes on your thoughts of the same topic.
Great. Thank you, Aloysius. And I also want to congratulate you on the report. It's a really good read and very engaging and very encompassing, I think, on the issue in a really special and unique way. You know, I come at this very much like Winnie does. You know, people in power set priorities. And so for me, it's the progress that's happened in that area is slow and painful as it seems to some of us. But the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Center for Women is a presidential center for women will next month release their first take on a dashboard. It is only at this point for West Africa, but on where we've gotten to in terms of gender equity in public leadership. And I think all you have to do is see that dashboard to know where we need to get to. You know, there are countries like Nigeria that I think most of us see as really, you know, strong, dynamic places. And then you look at, you know, while in many countries in West Africa, there have been really magnificent appointments of women in the cabinets. In the parliament, there are 7 women out of 109 in the Senate. There are 22 out of 360 in the House. I find that shocking. So for me, it is the presidents who have at least made 50% of their cabinets women. You know, to my knowledge, that's Rwanda, Ethiopia, South Africa, but others that are moving in that direction. I think they've set a bar for everybody. Everybody's paying attention. So that I think is really meaningful. And, you know, I also am really excited about where Amage, the program of the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Presidential Center to help accelerate the progression of women into those top positions is heading. And really hope we're going to see great things come from that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jamie. Could we switch over to Fiona, please?
Greetings from Johannesburg. I'm delighted to be here and part of this auspicious panel. In my comments, I think I'll move down from the very broad and overarching issues which my 2 colleagues have spoken to so eloquently, and perhaps to focus on 2 particular policy domains out of many, which are obviously important, which I think can contribute to accelerating gender equality. The first of these is targeted employment creation. And this can be through various channels, from public works programs to various other tools of employment promotion. I think that having independent employment on a large scale for women is important. And this is not to romanticize paid employment as some sort of necessarily liberating force. Of course, it can come with its own oppressions and exploitations, and particularly where that becomes a burden on top of women continuing with unpaid domestic labor. The quality of employment, of course, also matters. So having decent work with rights protected in the workplace and a living wage. But I think even with the caveats that I've recognized that employment in itself is not a solution, financial dependence through lack of employment can be a factor in the difficulties of escaping situations of gender-based violence, in trafficking, in perpetuating gender stereotypes, and so on. So I think employment creation on a large scale for women with decent jobs can be one of the many elements towards gender equality. And the second sort of policy domain, which I would want to highlight as I guess an obvious one, that around education, but taking a multifaceted approach to the importance of using this as a tool in many different ways. From the ECD level, early childhood development, which I think has been shown to be particularly important for the girl child, as well as for mothers. And that interventions at that stage do have significant returns, ranging to promotion of STEM subjects and STEM opportunities for the girl child, ranging to the provision of sanitary products for school-going girls, up to the higher education level. So obviously it's a wide set of interventions, but I think we can't avoid talking about the education domain as one of the key ones for advancing gender equality.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Michelle Williams.
Yes, thank you. And congratulations again on really an exquisite report. Let me add the public health framing to this wonderful conversation that my fellow panelists have added. I'd like to speak specifically to bolstering public health in Africa, and more specifically about the crucial leadership roles that women are playing. Let me begin with the global objective, and that is to prepare for the next pandemic, to respond to the current one, and to prepare for the next one. And to do that, we have to strengthen the public health infrastructure and build a healthcare workforce worldwide that is equitable, robust, and well empowered to achieve the goals ahead. This is going to be particularly true for the African continent, where the health systems are currently struggling to keep pace with the demands of the COVID crisis and the demands pre-COVID. And it's also a context, for example, where 40% of African countries are reporting massive disruptions in reproductive, maternal and child health and adolescent health services, according to the WHO. That's what we're facing now. So let's step back a little bit and look at where we were in 2016 to highlight what an effective response could look like. In Liberia, when President Shirley, who is the first democratically elected woman, she rebuilt that country that had been engulfed in 14 years of a civil war. And then she was faced with the deadliest health crisis of the 21st century, the Ebola outbreak in 2014, 2016. As she writes in the essay that is just so potently, so potent a narrative in the Foresight Africa, President Shirley responded to the Ebola crisis by lifting up community health workers, a population largely, predominantly, almost 100% women. And she listened to their advice on calming the crisis, and she empowered them to act locally. The result were benefits that were accrued by the entire world. The result was an inclusive, a more sustainable path of hope, action, and a solution to a global health threat. So the point I want to make here is, as we put a fine line on the workforce, think about enabling, empowering, and allowing for the professional maturation of a large workforce that has been undervalued, underseen, and underinvested in. I think the Liberia success story also tells us a lot that we can build on as we work our way out of the COVID-19 pandemic and position ourselves for future health threats. Just one additional point that I'd like to make. We have to invest in a workforce, and doing so is good for everyone. And we know this from the State of World's Nursing Report. From that report, I just want to share with you, 5.9 million more nurses are needed to meet the global demand. So we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. I also want to say that we have nearly a 90% of the shortage in nursing leadership and nursing expertise affects low and middle income countries, with the largest gaps existing in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Mediterranean WHO regions. So to address this, we really do have to invest. We have to invest strategically in building a workforce that is heavily populated by women. And doing so, I think, solves local as well as global issues. So I'll turn that over to you now again.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all very much for your kind remarks. Jenny, over to you.
Thanks, Aloysius. And I think that was a great opening. And now we have the opportunity to dig deeper on several of these dimensions. And I'd like to turn back to Honourable Winnie Keezer and to probe more deeply on the political front, where you've already highlighted the importance of quotas. In the Foresight report, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf also underlines the importance of political parties as gatekeepers who can either constrain or promote women's participation in government. And I was wondering whether you could share your thoughts about how political parties have played this role in Uganda and what more is needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In the case of Uganda, we are fortunate to have a constitution that mandates political parties to respect the quota system, even at political party level. And therefore, the political parties are compulsorily obliged under Article 71 of the Constitution to provide for a 30% amongst the leadership of the party. All political parties are guided by this article. The only problem that we still find is that they only look at fulfilling the 30% provision without necessarily looking at the real positions of influence. So we have women who are in power, who are in leadership, but without the real power. You will find the chairperson of the political party or the leader of the political party is a man, maybe even the vice chairperson may be a man. Then you will find places of women representative and other small positions that may not necessarily give women the power. Yes, it is true that I just concur with Madam Salif that political parties are the gatekeepers to the involvement of women or the constraint of women's involvement in political participation. Why? Because we realize that in many cases, most especially in Africa, there is heavy commercialization of politics and elections. And if women are not given understanding of what is expected of them, and this can only be done at a political party, they are allowed to fight them, have been guided by the Constitution, which also derives its mandate from the international legislations, the CEDAW, the Maputo Protocol, which we have domesticated anyway, and there is no way they can run away from it, because there is also a Political Parties Organizations Act that compulsorily guides the political parties on how they should run their affairs as political parties. However, we still find women complaining of being sidelined when it comes to being given positions that would open their eyes up, that would lead them to participate in real decision making. There is also cultural stereotypes that people still subject women to in these political parties, that a woman may not necessarily be the leader. So we have seen some other politics in all this talks about redressing the injustices according to culture and outlawing any cultural practices that may make it hard for women to participate in governance. Breaking the cultural stereotypes is not easy. So even at political party level, women are finding challenges to fully exploit their potential. Women are not given what they need to galvanize the momentum to put them to where they are supposed to go. Even political parties do not want to give women the opportunity to direct the quota system, which all women must go to. And so political parties at some times constrains the women's participation in a sense that they will always want to block them in a quota system or a reserved seat for women, which has also not enabled many more women to come on board. And that is why currently in Uganda, we are advocating for gender parity, a system where there will be a man and a woman running the same constituency at the same time, going beyond the quota system that has been provided. Yes, we acknowledge it. We are grateful for it because it has enabled us to have a 35% presence of women in parliament and around 24% at cabinet level. We are so grateful to this because it has enabled us to move a distance, it has enabled us to move some miles. So political parties are mandated by the Constitution. There is no way they can run away from our Constitution provision unless if they don't have the women to fill up the 30% provision. So other political parties, you find that they have only just the bare minimum of the 30%, while others have gone up from the 30% presence. Others have had their deputies and national coordinators as women, like the Alliance for National Transformation, a political party. Their national coordinator is a woman, and I just want to thank them. The National Unity Platform has 2 women as deputy presidents, and I think they are doing a great job in espousing the dictates of good governance and is ensuring that women are getting into the positions of decision making. I really would want to pray that worldwide, we advocate for either quota system in countries where they are not, because I've realized that quotas have become very important as a tool to enable women to get into positions of influence. Studies have indicated that countries that have espoused the quota system are at 49% representation, while those that have not espoused the quota system are at 16%. This gives us a challenge as leaders, as legislators, and possibly those who are in positions of influence to go further, to continue advocating for women involvement, because I know that countries that have involved women in their programs and in their leadership positions have harvested massively in terms of developing people and the women themselves, thus increasing on their economic growth and political participation. So Uganda seems to be celebrating these achievements because of the Constitution of 1995, where women put their foot down and said we can't continue past this Constitution by the international agreements to which we are a signatory as a country. So indeed, I still want to concur with Madame Shali that political parties can choose special. A lot of attention needs to be given to these political, all involved in gender equality, to put a lot of energy on educating political parties, let them understand the need of place the world belongs to.
Winnie, I think you're coming in and out. We really can't, hear everything you're saying. Yeah. Winnie, I think we're going to move over to another panelist now. We're having
Sure.
problems hearing you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Jenny, over to you.
Thanks so much, Winnie. And I think you very importantly underline the importance of changes in norms and stereotypes, as well as reforms in law, but some important lessons from Uganda. I'd like to turn now to Professor Chijena, who's already underlined women's economic opportunities and education as being key. But I was wondering if you could draw on your work on economic and industrial development and the role of public policies, and how these policies are in fact accounting for gender gaps, and what we've seen in terms of economic and industrial policies which have enabled women's fuller participation in the economy. I know these are big topics and probably warrant very deep discussion, but if you could share some thoughts on this over the next few minutes, that would be very much valued. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, I guess it's a very uneven picture across different policy domains and across different countries within Africa, given the vast heterogeneity in the continent. I think the key point which I would want to underscore is that no policy, whether it be economic policy or in any other sphere, implicitly or automatically accounts for gender gaps and necessarily advances gender equality without specifically taking measures which are directed at that. So any kind of economic policy, when I speak about the area of my own expertise, whether we think about trade policy, labor market policy, technology and innovation policy, industrial policy, macroeconomic policy, and so on, all of these policies have heterogeneous effects on women and on men. And even if a policy can be regarded as kind of progressive or pro-poor in general, it doesn't necessarily advance gender equality. So I think both at the level of policy design and of implementation, in any area of economic policy and going beyond economic policy for that matter, needs to take into account how that policy differentially affects women and men, as well as, of course, other dimensions which will be of concern to policymakers, youth, spatial, and so on. But obviously, our particular lens today is on the gender dimension. So to take into account what those differential effects are and what sort of measures in those policies can particularly advance women and gender equality. So I think my approach is one of not ghettoizing this as kind of women's issues, women's policies, gender policies. Of course, there's a particular role for those and policies and ministries and departments which have that as their primary mandate. But at the same time, it's important for the gender lens to be integrated across the board, whether it be in terms of fiscal policy and budget choices, whether it be in terms of trade policy, and taking into account how any trade policy and tariff policy and so on would differentially affect the sectors in which women tend to be concentrated in a particular country at a particular point of time. Similarly, beyond economic policy, to whether it be criminal justice or whatever. So I think any of these policy domains does have the potential to advance gender equality, but it's not a given. So if I think about industrial policy, and perhaps this will be my last point, but on my particular area of specialization, simply industrializing may or may not assist women or move towards gender equality. It depends on what types of industries are being promoted and whether it's a kind of race, even if women are being employed in large numbers, but if it's kind of a race to the bottom of really exploitative conditions and so on, it might look good on the employment numbers, but it's not advancing gender equality in any fundamental way. So I think, for me, the key point is about integrating that gender lens systematically throughout public policy formulation. Obviously, it comes to the fore more in certain domains than in others. And monitoring those differential effects on the girl child, on women, and adapting policies where needed. So to ensure that this is an integral part of the public policy agenda.
Great, thank you. Very important points, I think, particularly around understanding differential impacts and the importance of gender analysis and of course tracking impacts in practice. I was going to turn now to Professor Williams, and you've already put the public health framing at the forefront here, and of course it's front and centre on everyone's minds over the past 2 years with the pandemic, which in many ways brought up or to the fore some of these perennial constraints like the underpayment of frontline workers who are, of course, disproportionately women. So I guess I wanted to see whether you could share some more, if you like, promising or optimistic stories about the ways in which some of these underlying disparities in the health sector workforce have been addressed, and whether you could share this with the panel and the audience today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. This gives me an opportunity to really share with you something that I'm excited about that is highly collaborative and I think will begin to help empower nursing, midwives, and community health workers leadership. We are very aware, as Winnie said, of the importance of having women leadership, having that seat at the table. But having that seat at the table is just a first step. There then has to be, those women leaders have to be empowered, enabled, and equipped to engage across multiple sectors in addressing global health leadership issues across sectors of finance, agriculture, interior, you name it. And nursing leaders, chief nursing officers, as an example, have that seat of the table, but are not always engaged in the decision making and the priority setting and the agenda implementation. So with several partners, including the Africa CDC, Harvard University came together across 3 of our schools: the Kennedy School, which I know, Jenny, you are familiar with as an alumna, the School of Public Health, and the Graduate School of Education. And we said that we were going to commit ourselves in focusing our attention on enabling, empowering, and equipping women leaders from the nursing, midwifery, and community health sectors with the kinds of skill sets that they would need to be active, robust, vocal, and capable leaders when they get to that table. And we don't just mean that clinical nursing leadership program of the past that is just based on managing inside health systems. We're recognizing that many of the threats and challenges on a population global health scale involve systems outside of the traditional healthcare system in communities. And so the goal here, the promising aspect of this educational program, is to train up, empower, and enable nursing leaders in Africa, starting in Africa, with digital health transformation skills, understanding the use of digital technology for managing population health. Jamie mentioned the importance of data dashboards. We have to democratize the analytic skills, the interpretive skills of data, information, and evidence so that nursing leaders, community health workers, and others can use data to inform decisions, set priorities, and evaluate impact. So training in these non-traditional skills that nursing leaders would have: finance, financial technology, regulatory sciences, all of the skills that we would be training our male counterparts in health management that we haven't traditionally addressed in training nursing leadership. So I'm excited about that. And if we are able to do this, Jenny, we will get closer to meeting the goals that were established even before the pandemic. And I speak specifically to the health security agenda that is going to require more nursing, midwife, and community health worker engagement. And one of Dr. Tedros's biggest agenda items was universal health coverage. And we cannot achieve that goal, even in peacetime being non-pandemic time, without upskilling, training, nursing leadership, and building that workforce. So I think there's promise there. The Africa CDC as an anchor institution represents a very important organization that can make this a continental-wide activity.
Well, thanks so much for sharing. That sounds both kind of innovative and indeed very promising. So it will be interesting to see how it evolves. So the final round in the first question, last but not least, is to Jamie Cooper, who's already mentioned the Umaji Leaders Initiative, which is an initiative in partnership with the Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Presidential Centre. I know that you're excited about this. I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell us about the missions and goals of this initiative, what progress has been made so far, and where you see this going. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Jenny. I am excited about the initiative. It is a little bit different than much of the work that we do. The way Big Win philanthropy generally works is that we get behind public leaders, ministers, mayors, presidents, and work with them to ensure that their transformational agendas for their countries get realized, and whatever that means in terms of support. So I was very lucky to work with President Sirleaf during her presidency. And after that, she came to me and said, I have a big win for my post-presidency. And what I want to do is I want to spend the bulk of my time reaching behind me to the next group of women who are going to run to be presidents. And I've got a problem. I've turned around and there's no one there. So we need to do something about this, because that's going to be my legacy. And so I guess 2.5 years ago, the center launched what is called Amage, which is a Kru word, a Liberian language word that means we're going up. And it is a program or an initiative that takes women. The first class was not by application, is now open as well by application, but who were seen as the young potential could be president of my country one day, and were recommended. So these were women and are women who have already gotten themselves, like Winnie, on the ladder of leadership. So some of them are ministers, some of them are mayors, some of them are, the woman who started the Bringer Girls Back in Nigeria. They are a range of very, very dynamic, impressive women with high integrity. And the point of the program is that for many of these women, they reach these positions very organically. They worked really hard, they cared about something passionately, and they cared so much that they ran for an office, or they were so good at what they were doing, they were noticed and they were put to run a ministry. But the program is about getting to that very highest level and being deliberate about it, and having the ambition and imagining how you could change your country or the continent if you were to step into those shoes of power. And so, you've asked about the success of the class. The first cohort, I think, was a little bit blindsided by what they were walking into. There were 15 of them. One of them had was pretty clear on her ambition walking in, but all of them were quite proud of what they'd achieved so far. At the end of that first conversation with, not only Madam, but Amina Mohammed and Ngozi and Joyce Banda and people like that. I think these women recognize how scary it would be to reach for these highest reigns. But at the end of a 4-day forum, 6 of the 15 committed that they were going to put themselves in a position to be a credible candidate for president within the next 2 terms. All of them had a next step in mind that they were going to position themselves for. The second cohort came in much more, eyes wide open. We're recruiting for a 3rd cohort right now. But what's been amazing and is the sort of yin and yang of the challenges is as these women have come together, they have been very supportive cohort to cohort. And you already see the importance of having that continental depth. So within the first year of the first Amuje cohort, 3 of them were arrested. One of them was physically beaten up. Several of them were, things were said in the press, like they slept their way to that job, that just weren't true. And the rest of them and their coaches, both one-on-one about how they'd handled this, who helped them through this kind of crisis. They have gathered around for each other. They have made sure that tweets go out, that people are paying attention to what happens to them. They have really been there for each other. They have been enormously supportive, as a number of them have gotten neat appointments and gains. One of them did, in her particular country, Ole Dibawada just ran at the top of her party, and they didn't win, but she put herself out there, and others are following suit, learning about how you get into a mainstream party, how you work yourself to the top of it. So I am really, I'm much more aware myself of what we are asking of these women, what they're having to put themselves through without, the kinds of quotas, especially in some countries, and that Winnie was talking about, and how important those kinds of things of, why countries need role models and women in cabinets. It is a big thing that we are asking these women to do, to be the ones who break the ceiling. But it's also incredibly exciting and inspiring to be in a room and see they're not a needle in a haystack. There are amazing, amazing, ready, visionary, clear, competent women sitting there, that will get there.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe we can share the link to the initiative as well, because I know that we have a lot of participation from the continent, and we may have some potential applicants for your 4th cohort on the line. But let me turn now to Aloysius for the next round of questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That was pretty impressive. Just our audience around the world and in Africa in particular, please join us by emailing if you have questions, events@brookings.edu, or via Twitter @BrookingsGlobal. Let me turn to Winnie first. In your opener, you did indeed talk about the quotas and the Uganda situation, which we heard you earlier. Earlier this year, something Jamie also alluded to, the Nigerian Senate rejected a constitutional amendment to create special seats for women in the national and state assemblies. Yet, 47% of registered voters in Nigeria in 2019 election were women, but they occupy only 6.5% of the National Assembly. So how can we possibly make progress for women in political leadership in Africa when a heavy weight on the continent is taking us back, as just articulated?
Just like you have said, Aloysius, the African continent is still held back by the cultural stereotypes and the cultural norms that we dearly espouse. And our cultures have not encouraged us to continue advocating for the inclusion of women in positions of leadership. It's so sad that the Nigerian population could not think of involving the 49% of its population into leadership. In many of the African countries, women form the majority. Coming to my country, for example, with a population of approximately 45.7 million, women account for 50.7% of that population. But you will still find that we are only the 35% are the only in representation. And this is courtesy of the quota that I talked about. So the Nigerian leadership needed to understand that involving women in leadership is not just courtesy, but part of the legislations and the international protocols that we have appended our signatures to as nations of Africa and as a people. And they needed to be aware that it's not only women that feel the negative effects of failure to invest in women. And investing in women at this level means investing even in their leadership capabilities. Investing in women means involving them economically to generate issues that concern them. My sister over there was talking about the issues that they have involved in their country in regard and in respect of providing sanitary towels for the young girls and ensuring that they bring on quota systems for the girls. And I can attest to this, how it did miracles in my country when there was, and it still is, a quota system for girls going to university. This was an issue that was advocated by the women who were in parliament. So it's really so sad that the Nigerian people, and this I speak to the president of Nigeria, President Buhari, he needed to have understood that empowering women and investing in women is a thing that leads to the investment in even the welfare of the children. And it leads to combating of poverty and driving economic growth of the country. So we need, as a people, to look out possibly for senior members of our African continent, women like Madam Salif, other women that we know of higher standing in our society, to begin a journey of speaking to these presidents who are still laid back by traditions and norms and cultural practices and do not look at the advancement of women as advancing their economic growth and countries as a whole. And for that, I would like to really thank the Salif Center with their Mogi project that is nurturing women who are having high ambitions. How I wish some of these women would go on a mission to talk to leaders like the leadership in Nigeria and other African countries that have not valued the participation of women in leadership. And we see if it can have a change. However, I'm excited that they have started the conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Starting is always not easy. Now that the conversation has started, I know there is some milestone that they have achieved in only having it tabled. Next, we shall be breaking the ceiling and ensuring that women at least have a voice.
Right. Great. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I think as Jamie alluded earlier in her remarks, progress is being made, but it's slow and painful.
Yeah.
I think we all need to be on guard to continue to push the frontiers. Thank you. Let me turn to Fiona. What role, if any, do you see for development partners in addressing the underlying drivers of gender inequity in Africa and promoting progress in this front?
Well, I think there is an important role. The emphasis on the partners and partnership, which you mentioned in your question. So I think the role to be effective is one which rests primarily on working with and supporting local movements and initiatives.
Mhm.
So it could be NGOs, social movements, community-based organizations, trade unions working on gender issues, women's organizations, and so on. I think if a kind of gender push from development partners is seen as being imposed, as a kind of an unwelcome requirement from northern donors, it's unlikely really to bring a fundamental change. It's more likely to be a kind of a box ticking approach where there's a feeling, okay, we need to do this just to get these donor funds or whatever. So it's really about, I think, understanding the specificities of local conditions, which are different across the different countries and regions of Africa. And in every country in Africa, there are local movements pushing for gender equality with different strengths and taking different forms and so on. And I think there's an important role in terms of supporting those, identifying, what are the pressing issues in particular contexts and the most feasible strategies towards unlocking those constraints. I think linked to that, it's important to have an evidence base for what is effective in particular contexts and what can be upscaled. And of course, this is going to be different whether we're talking about kind of economic support interventions or issues aimed at political representation or at healthcare and so on. But to really look at what has proved to be effective and where it has been proved to be effective, where can that be upscaled while avoiding kind of generalizations which don't take account of specificities of local context and so on, but really building on those experiences. So I think it's about listening, supporting, and where things are working, building on those.
Yeah, great, thank you. Development partners certainly have the firepower and obviously can push even harder in terms of gender equity, as you say, using evidence-based approaches. Let me turn to Michelle. In her brilliant essay in our Foresight this year, Dr. Rebecca Clegg emphasized that female students are more likely to enroll in graduate studies when they encounter successful women role models. The question for you is, if you can share with us, what has been your own experience as a role model and mentor to many?
Thank you. That's such an important question. And it comes back to this exciting initiative that Jamie spoke about. If you can see it, you can dream it. It's cliche, but it's so real. And what we tend to underestimate and underappreciate is those students or leaders who are the first ever dean of faculty at Harvard, or the first, democratically elected president. There is a moment of first celebrating the accomplishment, but then also reflecting on the fact that there are others who probably should have been the first, but because of this gender discrimination or other inequities, you're not the first. So sort of reckoning with what the personal accomplishment means in the context of the surround of that accomplishment is something that I think requires significant fellowship. And I'm excited about the Emoji Initiative because it recognizes that. It recognizes the inherent loneliness, isolation, and need for fellowship to think about doing something bold. And having role models in that space is very important. I would also say that, when you think about women in particular ascending into leadership roles, that network doesn't always exist. And so it's even more important for mentors and people in position, men and women, to recognize that a leadership journey doesn't happen on one's own, that it does take some intentionality in bringing forward a group of people who would enable, encourage, and support a new leader's journey into the role of leadership. And then, you know, as I've been trying to share about the Harvard Global Nursing Leadership Program, it's an example where there are new skill sets that domain experts will need to bring on board. So, for example, if you are a senior nursing country level chief nursing health officer, you know, what are the leadership technical skills in the toolkit that needs to be added? Is it in the area of finance? Is it in the area of global health diplomacy? Is it in health communication or crisis communication management? And I think the role mentors can play is to listen to young leaders, people ascending into leadership roles, hear where there might be opportunities for engaging in fellowship or continuing education. And that's what I would say. But mentors play a very big role. Mentors can and should be proactive in offering, but also proactive in listening deeply and intently and being there for the entire journey. Because, you know, I'm listening to Jamie talk about the first and the second cohort. And Jamie, I can't help but think about the work that you've been doing for, is it over a decade now, with the Ministerial Leadership Program, and how the intangible cohort building that happens and the return on the investment of bringing cohorts of leaders, ministers together are far exceeding, I think, the initial vision. It allows for collaboration, it allows for personal growth, and I think it allows for baking in a sustainability that is fundamentally important, in especially for encouraging and enabling women leadership.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a good segue to Jamie as well, because we know that in addition to the Harvard program, the AMUJ you just alluded to, we know also that your work emphasizes the role of youths and girls and civil society across Africa. One theme emphasized in our report this year is the need for gender justice. Would you share with us your thoughts on the roles that youths are playing to accelerate change through gender justice in Africa?
Sure. I have to say I had a little giggle. I don't know if Michelle could see about role models, because she is the role model for one of my daughter who can't believe that I know Michelle in person in real life. So I know what they do for girls who are science brained and want to go into public health. So in terms of your question on gender parity and why, you know, we're so interested on the continent. When we first started looking, so Africa, I think most people know, is going through a huge demographic transition and a dramatically growing population. And that presents an opportunity for a demographic dividend, that there are a number, every country at some point has gone through this evolution where they have had a very high, with a bulge essentially, where the birth dynamics change, and you have an opportunity to have, to transition to a very high productive working population, and a lower population of dependents. And that sets your economic trajectory for decades to come. If you do that well, if that productive population is truly productive. And so one of the things, as we looked at supporting leaders in Africa, was to understand which policies, what is it that you need to do to get this productive population to be super productive, so that you get that economic win in the end. And we had David Bloom from Harvard come and run us through a lot of the data, and he showed us, you know, if you have a healthy population, if you have an educated population. And what he did with all of these was he would show us two countries that had the same per capita economic trend for a period of time. So he put them China and India neck to neck. And then he would show exactly when one started investing heavily in health and one didn't, and what happened to those countries, and how it went. One of the divergences that he highlighted was Egypt and Mexico. And one country put a lot of emphasis on girls' equity, making sure that they were in school, that their opportunities for jobs, it assumed that they were going to work, that their health, that they were very gender equity conscientious, and the other wasn't. And that was where you saw that tremendous split. And I think it's common sense that if you're looking for a productive population and the girls, women are all dependents and not productive, if you lose 50%, that's not a good outcome. So, so that's for us why this focus on gender, and why, also we believe so strongly that the youth voices have to be part of this dialogue and discussion. And to be really honest, I think there is a waking up to it. But right now, again, if you were to look at it in Egypt, I think youth really did change and make their voices heard very clearly. But it wasn't in a constructive way. And I think that's what African countries need to work through, is you don't want to have a lot of angry voices, and that the only way to communicate is by screaming and shouting. You want to have venues for productive dialogue. And I hold ourselves accountable in not, having enough clarity, but it's certainly something as we work with leaders that they are much more aware of. How do we communicate in a way that's really listening and hearing and constructive together? You are seeing in a number of countries youth ministers who, along with gender ministers, are often like the bottom of the pecking order, suddenly being given very serious portfolios. So I'm hopeful.
Great. No, the comparison with Mexico and Egypt reminds me of next door to Egypt, where I used to live, Tunisia, where from the very, very beginning, President Bourguiba, the father of the first president of the nation, set the tone on the idea of gender parity, which is why in all international comparators, you find that almost always the Tunisians, the women rank very high in secondary school education, primary, and of course, university. Thank you very much for that. Jenny, I think it's time for us to see what we have in stock from the audience. Do you see any questions from the audience to pose to our panelists?
Well, I see many questions from the audience. I think we have over 30, and sadly, we don't have enough time to explore all of them. They cover kind of what works, about girls and role models, overcoming legal barriers, the role of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, leadership by LGBTQI groups. There was a specific question for Michelle asking, why can't we have the same initiative in the US with Black communities? So it's clearly beyond the scope of this session to delve into all of these. Aloysius and I extracted a couple using our, moderators' prerogative that we're going to put before you, and I'll ask the first. Each of you don't feel compelled to answer because we do have a final wrap-up question as well. But one I thought was a way of bringing together a lot of what we've been talking about around women's leadership, was just to put the question more explicitly and to ask you what you see as working to accelerate women's leadership in government or the private sector. So we can start with Winnie, if you'd like to respond to this one, and then we can run through. It's probably simplest if we go in the same order again. So let me turn back now to Uganda.
Okay, right.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Winnie.
Yes, thank you so much. I know that accelerating women's participation in leadership calls for concerted efforts, ensuring that we bring men and women all on board, to acknowledge that it's very important to play together, to lead together for a common purpose. And this can be achieved by ensuring that we now have these legislations as a mandate for countries. Like I said, that those countries in Africa that have achieved gender parity, like Rwanda, we celebrate Rwanda as one of the countries that have achieved gender parity and even going beyond, because women are more in their parliament than the men. But it's because of the consideration that has been put by the leaderships in those countries that have decided to walk the path of gender equality and equity. In Uganda, for example, there is a requirement before a budget of any ministry is passed for a certificate of gender equity. And if all other countries can be compelled to ensuring that they take on the quotas and present these quotas to their parliaments for constitutional reforms, then we shall accelerate the inclusion of women in parliament, in cabinet, and even in other civil society bodies. In all public spaces, we shall have women participate. I can say that this is what has given us the leverage, and this is what has given us the right attitude and charisma to continue fighting on. Also, having right mentors in place. Those women who will take it upon themselves to ignite the change that we so desire. Those women who will take it upon themselves to be the role models and mentors for the young women in their leadership journey. It can also help to accelerate the involvement of women in leadership. It has worked in other countries. It is working in Uganda. It worked in Rwanda. It has worked in South Africa. And I know it can continue working in other countries. And Africa will have a gender parity atmosphere, an atmosphere that espouses the involvement of women at all leadership levels. And that is what I dream.
Well, thank you very much. Fiona, would you like to add something here on the what works on leadership?
Sure. To add to the brilliant points which Winnie has made, I fully agree with what she's said about quotas. Of course, we all recognize that it's not enough, and just having women in positions is not enough. We also need structural and systemic change. And of course, not all women leaders necessarily advance a kind of a broader women's agenda. But even with all of those caveats, we have to emphasize the importance of women's representation, women's leadership, as one of the means towards that broader change. I think it's also important that it's not only about obviously the numbers of women that are in parliament or in cabinet or whatever, but which positions they occupy within those, and the importance of women occupying what I might call non-traditional portfolios. We're more used to having women ministers in portfolios like education, health, the disabled, where those portfolios exist, and so on. And of course, those portfolios are absolutely fundamental for women in the countries, as well as more broadly. But it's also important to have women in positions in the security apparatus, in economics, and so on, which are kind of less traditionally associated with women's leadership. And perhaps lastly, I would say it's crucial, I think, to identify what are the pathways towards leadership and power for women, because it's not just that you would be parachuted and drop into a position. In one of these pathways is through youth politics. And I think in many countries we find a kind of traditional pathway where women's involvement in the youth wings of political parties and so on is one of the pathways towards seniority and power. Another common pathway is outside of party politics, and gaining prominence and making an impact in non-party political positions and other domains, whether it be legal or community organizing or whatever, and gaining prominence and experience and making a mark in those domains. So I think these are the sort of pathways which it's also important to look at supporting, so that it's not just at the apex, but building up those different levels through that, and building up a media profile and recognition of women's important contributions in these various ways.
Great, thank you. I can see those segues there to both Jamie and to Michelle. So Michelle, you go first, and then we'll turn to Jamie.
Sure. I really love the two responses, and I just wanted to add, in addition to pathways, I'd like to say partners. And I say partners intentionally because we have an opportunity that I don't think we've all leveraged adequately, and that is forging good, solid partnerships that support youth and gender equity with our corporate colleagues. And I'm thinking specifically about all of the resources and the professed goodwill and intention of investing ESG dollars strategically to address environment, social, and governance. And I think if we can find creative ways to open conversations, to draft an agenda that addresses gender equity issues, that addresses climate and environment issues, that address youth empowerment and encouragement of youth in the governance pathways, I think we will be better off. And, you know, I'm always looking at development and equity through a public health lens. And if we are successful in doing all of this, we will be accelerating the advancement of health equity as well, and closing not only national health disparity gaps, but global health disparity gaps with the resources, the talent, and the accountability that we can bring together by partnering strategically with the private sector.
That's a great point. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Jamie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, amen. That's all everybody else's. I think they've covered the lot.
Aloysius, over to you.
Thank you. Perhaps we have an opportunity for just one more. There is a question by Daphne Titus of Mapasa Strategies, and she asks, what about equity in sporting opportunities, sports? We've heard so much about that in the news lately. Fiona, you want to go first this time?
Well, you're ambushing me with that one. I mean, I think for me, maybe I would take sports as an example, to say that, you know, we've in this discussion been focusing on, I guess, particular domains, which perhaps ourselves personally we tend to work on health, leadership, economy, and so on. But really, there are a myriad of domains which are important to gender equality, cultural, sports, and so on. And that the opportunities for sports involvement go beyond sporting excellence. Right. And the importance of giving the girl child and women opportunities for excelling in sporting excellence, but it's also about opportunities for improved personal health through being active and so on. So I think it's something which is important across the continent and more broadly across the world, and providing the resources and the opportunities for women to flourish and excel in the sporting arena.
Yeah, great, thank you. Jenny, shall we go straight to basically final rounds, a minute or so from each person? Do you want to kick us off on that, please?
Sure. So we were just going to ask you to leave our audience with a takeaway from this very rich discussion. So a takeaway in terms of actions, it could be at the individual level, it could be at the corporate level, it could be, for government, for philanthropists. But if you can just rather simplistically, of course, because we've all recognized the complexity and the multifaceted and chronic nature of the challenges being faced. Just one takeaway for our audience today. I think we have about 6 minutes left. So you'll have about 1.5 minutes each. Winnie, can we come back to you for one takeaway? And then we'll just proceed through. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe in a minute, like you've said, the Africa Barometer 2021 on women's political participation, African countries are still far from achieving women's equal and political participation. So I would really want to ask all of us at our levels to become champions of engaging governments wherever they are in Africa to ensure that they take care of the girl child, they take care of the needs of women, the health issues, the economic issues, as well as the political issues, because involving women is involving the nation. You can't plan for women and you don't involve them. Anything for them without them is not for them. And therefore, all leaders viewing us and present on this platform, I would like to say, let us continue with the fight for equality.
You're on mute, Jenny.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Winnie, for those powerful final words. Fiona?
Thanks. I thought I would just mention one issue which we haven't touched on at all in this discussion, which is that of land. Not something that I personally focus on a lot, and not something which is necessarily important to all women across the continent. For example, young urban women, this would be very far from perhaps their pressing concerns. But for many women in rural areas, I think access to land and land tenure is one very important issue where a very deep gender inequality persists. It's uneven across countries, but in some countries on the continent, women still can't inherit land. And we find widespread practices of women being evicted from their small holdings when, for example, the husband passes away. And it's connected, I think, with a range of other problems of gender-based violence, forced marriage, forced evictions and forced moving and so on. So I think it's connected to security of tenure, to food security, even to access to credit, to entrepreneurship and productive activities, as well as to perceptions of even status as an adult. So I think it's a legal issue in many cases, but also an issue of implementation and protecting women's rights in those rural areas. So I thought I would just, it's not an overarching issue, but I thought let me just pick up on that since we hadn't really touched on it at all.
No, thank you so much. I think that was, it's important to highlight the importance of land and tenure, and it's linked both kind of instrumentally to a number of other important aspects. So thank you for that. Michelle.
Yeah, I'm going to focus on pay equity, and I want to come back to sports, Jenny, because I wanted to be asked the sports question. I want us to celebrate the fact that the U.S. women's soccer, after a multi-year, I would say multi-decade fight, finally earned the right for equal work, equal pay. And that's even though they were out achieving their male counterparts objectively, empirically for the world to see. So I want to use sports to say, listen, it is about equal work, equal pay. We have to continue to work across all sectors, celebrate the success of these sportswomen, but go forward all throughout every sector of our civil society and be sure that we're working on equity. And the other thing I'll just close with is talent is broadly, widely, democratically distributed, but opportunities are not. And all of us, no matter what sector we're working in, should be working to balance that equation. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Jamie.
That was
Hard act to
very
follow.
inspiring. I think there are so many issues. I agree with Fiona, property rights. I know Title IX, which is what gave me equal access to sports in the US, was, absolutely a game changer, having lived in other countries too and seen the difference that's made. I think every country needs to decide. There are such a host of issues that you could start with that are so important on the gender equity front, but those issues won't emerge and we won't be having those discussions if women aren't part of that leadership and part of that discussion. So I think that's the first place to start. But I think, as Fiona said, there are so many things, they work or they don't work, or they have to be constructed thoughtfully. But there is no shortage of things that 50% of the population care about that aren't getting sufficient attention, or that wouldn't be dealt with differently if the discussion was broadened out.
Yeah.
Aloysius, over to you just for the final thank you and on behalf of Brookings.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. I think we heard so many things today, which really, from public policy point of view, will continue to push the agenda. The need for the fact that role models matter came out very strongly in all the conversations. Mentorship without mentors is very, very difficult for some of us to get along, and particularly marginalized women. Showing up matters, and so representation we heard today. The need for systematic integration of gender lens in public policy was also part of the readout from this session today. Development partners obviously have a key role to play as well in gender equity. Concerted efforts, not just by women, it came out very strongly, by men as well, in partnership with all stakeholders. And these are some of the many, many things we heard today. It's very difficult to do justice to such a rich conversation. And I just want to use the opportunity to thank each and every one of you, Winnie Kiza, Jamie Cooper, Michelle Williams, and Fiona Tregener. Thank you all very, very much for choosing to spend your time with us today here. Of course, my partner in crime, Jenny, thank you very much. And my colleagues in the Brookings family, AGI, Christina, David, the rest of the team, I really, really would like to thank you all. And of course, John Allen for making the time to open us up today. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you all.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.